Oh hi, I'm just thinking of trying something new. See, I love animation as a medium, but I also love being a real person as well. So I was just thinking, what if I try combining the two? I've got some stuff right here, so I think I just gotta... Go back! You know what time it is? That's right, it's time for a new Overwatch killer. I swear, every time a new game gets released, especially if that game features heroes and or shooting, people just assume that it's an attempt on another game's life. I mean, I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. I wake up, I log on, Twitter says there's a new Overwatch killer. Only like one of these games is an actual attempt at competing with Overwatch as well to begin with. So Deadlock. No, not that one. Valve's new 6v6 hero shooter, though it's much more accurate to describe it as Valve's new 6v6 MOBA where you can shoot her. Deadlock is in closed alpha and honestly I've really been enjoying it. The best way I could describe it is a mix of Dota and a third-person shooter, and as someone with way too many hours in both Overwatch and League, you'd think that that's nearly perfect for me. It's like the perfect combination of two games that I play way too much, but therein lies an issue that I personally have with Deadlock. But before we get into any critiques, we may as well make sure that we're all on the same page about the game's mechanics. So before you even get into game, Deadlock actually has a very interesting way of going about character selection, which is the video essay way of saying that you gamble for your character. You select at least 3 characters and give them each differing levels of priority, and you get whoever the game decides. But on the one hand, it does pretty much eliminate one-tricking, which can be seen as a bonus if you hate one-tricks, but honestly, the only thoughts I have on this is that it limits potential synergies. One of my favourite duos I discovered while playing was Mo and Krill combined with Bebop, because when Mo ults to stun someone, you can hook him or the enemy and transport both of them to you as Bebop. But with this system, you can't guarantee that both of you roll the characters you want. Moving to actual gameplay though, and it is quite literally a shooter inside a MOBA. There are 4 lanes, 2 solo, 2 duo, and you get assigned your lane at the start of each game and just roll with it. Minions come in, kill them for souls, upgrade abilities and items with those souls, and destroy the enemy base by breaking through their defense of towers and stronger towers before destroying their patron in the base. With the basics out of the way, we can go a little bit more in depth now. Not what I meant. The core controls of the game feel very nice, the movement is fluid, the guns feel good, and most of the abilities are really intuitive, though there's some pieces about the movement that's strange to me. There's a slide to the game, but it's not really possible to use in the way you'd expect, with the map not having many slopes, so the only other time you can slide is just in neutral gameplay, but with no active sprint button, it's hard to feel like you're building speed for a slide. And that's because you aren't. So you can't actually slide on flat ground without investing something. But the reason I bring this up is because there is an actual benefit to sliding. While sliding, you have infinite ammo, which is nice and all, but again, moments to slide, especially during combat, are sparse at best. There's only 2 ways to slide, assuming you have no slope, which is to either dash using your stamina and crouch afterwards, or to have the out-of-combat sprinting item, which gives you just enough natural speed to start slides, though it only works out of combat. I just find the sliding mechanic strange and maybe a little bit shoehorned in, especially since the infinite ammo portion is not listed anywhere. There's also how characters who invest into their stamina typically prefer to build kinetic dash, which grants bonus ammo, doesn't consume the extra piece of stamina that a regular dash jump would, and also covers a much greater distance than sliding would. The rest of your movement options are super fun though. The dash jump, like I already mentioned, feels really nice. Regular dashing, double jumping, and climbing all fit well into how the game plays and just lets it control smoothly, which is something that I find is really important in any game that has shooter-like elements. My favorite aspect of Deadlock though has to be denying souls. Like most MOBAs, minions come through the lanes, which you need to kill in order to earn souls, which are a hybrid of XP and money. But after killing a minion, an orb floats out of them, which you can shoot to secure additional souls, which works both ways. When the enemy kills one of your minions, you can shoot the soul that comes out to deny them those souls, which is such a fun addition to the MOBA gameplay, especially during the early game. It's by far the best way that Deadlock bridges the gap between a MOBA and a shooter, and it's honestly a really creative mechanic even if it seems small. You need to pay attention to both minions if you want to maximize your soul gain. Is this mechanic a little bit strange to emphasize this much? Yes. Is this mechanic also extremely impactful on the game? Also yes. Since the barrier for getting levels to unlock abilities and getting points to upgrade them is locked behind your soul count, it means that denying as many souls as you can during lane phase can give you a massive advantage of having more items, abilities, or even upgrades than your opponents do, practically automatically winning any trade you take with them. So I've hit my quota of praises, which means it's time for me to be a little bitch. More specifically, I have a fair few critiques, but they're coming from, well, not a place of love, we'll say a place of vague interest. I'm not trying to shit on the game just because I'm an Overwatch player and grrr, no one should play the game that isn't my game. I really like what I have played of Deadlock, and since it's in a closed alpha, that means there's definitely a chance for some of the pain points that I've encountered to get fixed. So with that out of the way, let's start here. I don't really vibe with this art style that much, specifically the character designs. Now, does this affect my enjoyment of the game? No, not at all. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I enjoy gameplay primarily, especially in multiplayer games like this. I'm just not the biggest fan of a 1950s mafia fantasy type of aesthetic. I prefer things a little bit more fantastical or even futuristic. This isn't to say that the character designs are bad, not at all, mainly just that I wouldn't want them to appear in my dreams. But critiquing the art direction isn't really telling on how good or bad a game is in my opinion. If you vibe with it, great, and if you don't, oh well. You can't do much about your thoughts on it, I just personally don't vibe with it that much. I'm also not the best at expressing why I may or may not enjoy a piece of art, it's generally just this makes my brain happy. But something I do know how to talk about is gameplay, and there's only one way I can describe the majority of the characters in this game. I'm dead serious, like this is the best way I can describe the hero gameplay right now. So I'm not the biggest fan how out of the 21 characters, 13 of them just use a gun of some variety. Even if only a couple of them are actually hit scan, I just find it a little boring having over half of your cast just wielding regular guns. We have a gargoyle, a slime guy, and this creature, and you're telling me that we're still using Thompson SMGs? Sure, some of them are projectiles, but they're such fast moving projectiles, and every weapon is intended to be used in either mid to close range, so it doesn't really affect how you control your shots as much. I just personally like a little more variety in weapons when it comes to these kind of MOBA shooters. I want to keep Overwatch comparisons to an absolute minimum, as Overwatch is a shooter with MOBA elements, and Deadlock is straight up a MOBA that you can shoot in. But Overwatch, there's 16, maybe 17 bog standard guns of some variety. Yeah, there's a twist on them in some cases, but that's over half the cast using a really creative weapon. Lucio shoots people with sound, Sigma throws gravity balls, Venture throws exploding dirt. Some of my favorite characters to play in Deadlock so far have been Yamato, Bebop, and Haze. Haze does use SMGs, and I'm not saying that regular weapons are a bad thing, I just think a little more variety goes a long way. Yamato has some kind of shotgun projectile and grenades, while Bebop has a laser beam which shreds when you get some fire rate items going. I won't cover every character or else we'll be here all day, I just wish there was a little more creative liberty taken when creating the weapons that the characters use. Now, in fairness, this is much easier said than done. If a character was made fully melee or had bullets that explode after a certain distance, they would have a much harder time contesting souls from minions. Even the characters that are projectile based have a harder time denying souls than the hitscan characters do. Even if it takes less than half a second for their bullets to reach a soul, that's a lot longer than instant. So you can imagine how bad it would be if you had an extremely short range weapon. To stick on the topic of weapons though, it does bother me slightly that characters with the funky weapons like Viscus or even Ivy are focused on being more supportive. Not to say that they can't output damage, but their abilities aren't fully focused on killing, which for my DPS riddled brain is a minor letdown because I want to play with the funky weapons. I really should emphasize that it's minor though. I mean, I was playing a full support build Ivy and was still outputting good damage and could hold my own in fights. I just prefer characters like Yamato and Bebop who are fully spec'd into dealing damage. It's entirely irrational, I just wanted to mention it anyway. So before I talk about the characters even more, because I've not even gotten into their abilities yet, please allow me to just vent some frustrations real quick. Why can anyone just leave the game? I know it's just a testing period, but like, why can anyone just leave in the middle of the match with no penalty? I don't get it. There's a massive notification that will pop up in the top left of your screen that just says, this match is now safe to leave without penalty. Like, no! Penalize anyone who leaves. Penalize everyone who leaves the game. What do you mean? I truly do not get the logic behind this. Like, okay, one person leaves the game. All right, so your game quality is gonna dip. So you know what the game says? It just says, oh yeah, all right, the game quality's gone down. Someone left. Maybe they were tilted. Maybe they were just being a baby. Maybe their internet just went out. Well, it doesn't matter. All of you can leave now. Like, I don't see the purpose of it. You're making the game quality worse. Like, why? Like, is this something from Dota? I've never played Dota, so I wouldn't know, but like, if this is from Dota, then I can say with confidence this is kind of stupid, like. And speaking of stuff from Dota, you can pause the match. Now look, in fairness, I know that this is a good feature in concept, it's handy, and typically it's only going to be used by people who just want to, you know, maybe their duo has to quickly run to the bathroom, maybe they're, I don't know, like their internet went out for a moment, so you're just going to quickly pause it and everyone will be fine. And that's lovely. That's great. Consider there are like Valorant players playing this game right now. I had a game where someone died and just paused the game because they were being a whiny baby. Like, it's too much power to be giving these players. So after that brief intermission, we can return to talking about the characters because their abilities are incredibly fun, but also a little bit linear at times. If we take Yamato as an example, her 2 is a targeted dash to an enemy, her 3 is a slash in front of her, but her 1, a charge up damaging ability with some decent range. The most optimal combo is to charge up 1 for as long as you can to do damage before going in with 2, and using 3 for some damage and a heal. As for 4, it's your ult. It can be thrown in when needed, but realistically, you'd use it after 3 since it resets your cooldowns. Like I said, I love Yamato, but there's effectively only one way to use her abilities. You'd nearly never want to use the charge up in close range unless you just have no other options available to you. This isn't true in every case. To return to another one of my favorites for a moment, look at Bebop. Yes, his most optimal combo is 3-2-1. Hook an enemy into you, stick your bomb on them, and then punt them back into their team, but he has other options when it comes to using that bomb on 2. You can stick it on a minion and punt it towards the enemies as a way to make it blow up, or even throw it on an ally who can dash in quickly, like Yamato, allowing you to save your hook to guarantee your punch so that you can power up your primary fire. I need to say that some character kits though, like Vindicta, flow perfectly. There's synergy within their tools, such as how Vindicta can use her 2 as an escape, a movement tool, a rapid fire DPS option, or even just as a way to get a better angle for her snipes on the ult. Haze has some invisibility and sleep darts that help her take off angles and flanks with her single target focused damage from her guns, and Wraith is the classic frontline DPS who wants to melt down the enemy frontlines before teleporting to and hounding on the backline. But then there's also characters where stuff just doesn't add up. Take Infernus. His ult and 2 do synergize with each other. The ult starts a timer before he blows up and stuns an area around him, with his 2 allowing him to speed up and rush in so that he can get as many enemies as possible. But his passive and recommended build doesn't follow this engage style. It encourages him to hang back, spreading several damage over time effects on the enemies with his passive and ricochet item. Sometimes the designs just contradict themselves. It'd be the same as some guy who makes videos in his room about games that he loves with overly dramatic and negative sounding titles, which actually makes it seem like he doesn't like the games that he's talking about whatsoever. Wait. And that's a really strange thing about the designs of certain characters. While I find the vast majority of them really fun, some of them just don't seem to know what they want to do. Take Lady Geist. 2 of her abilities have tremendous range and seemingly gear her towards being more focused on poking the enemy and whittling them down. But her 2 and ult are melee range and all about draining HP. But her gun matches her perfectly. It's a small handgun that can be easily concealed within a bag, and she's this rich fancy My family watches these videos. I probably shouldn't make that joke. Her weapon fits. My point is that I fully support her weapon just being a gun. It fits in this case. It makes sense, you know? Anyway, a large part of this comes down to builds and information, which I have to say this game does a really great and really bad job at giving the player information. Earlier on, I mentioned how sliding grants infinite ammo. You do not get told this in the tutorial section which covers sliding. There's additional pieces like this as well, like the unsecured souls item was something I never understood until it was explained to me. They're temporary souls you lose on death, so go buy once you pick them up. And honestly, I don't even know what the mid-boss actually does yet, I'm just assuming it's some kind of combat buff. But the big thing is builds, which is where I have to praise and question Valve at the same time. In the shop, there's a browse builds button, which lets you look at the most popular community-made builds, which are infinitely better than the default ones you get recommended. But the thing is, you don't get told about the browse builds function, which is weird because that's such a useful tool, especially when you're new to the game. One of the biggest pain points of MOBAs is how hard they are to get into. You need to learn a new character, learn how they should be played, learn the general mechanics of the game, learn what it's like to play against the other characters, and of course, learn how to strengthen your character efficiently. Having builds made by the community, the top players if you will, makes things so much easier when trying to learn. You can think of it like training wheels. Once a player understands the game and its mechanics better, they can start experimenting with their own builds, but until then, they can use these guaranteed safe ones. So my main question is, why isn't the browse builds button something you get told about? I only found it after like 6 or 7 hours of playing, and it immensely improved my experience when trying new characters. It even tells you which abilities to level up and when. I just stumbled onto it randomly because I was like, hey, what's this browse build button do? Clicked on it and then it's like, oh, this is incredibly useful. Why don't I get told? And this is the big thing about Deadlock to me. There's no hook. There's nothing massively unique within the game that stands out to me as the reason to play it beyond its characters and its concept. Obviously, you can't play this game's characters anywhere else. This is the only game that I can play Yamato in after all. But like I said earlier, over half of the game's characters just use generic guns as their primary weapons, which just takes away from the cast to me. They all control really well and are fun, I need that to be clear, but it's just that there's not a lot of new ideas at play here in the character designs, and even less so within the core gameplay. I mean, the gameplay itself is pretty much just Smite, but with some Call of Duty, Fortnite, Overwatch flavouring. To me, it doesn't excel as a MOBA. In League, I loved playing jungle because I loved all of the strategy behind it. I loved planning out my routes. I loved planning when to take a gank on the enemy team. I loved punishing the enemy jungler for making a bad play or a bad gank by stealing their camps. The only similarity to that in Deadlock is just choosing the right time to roam in the early game. There's not really much else. And it doesn't excel in its shooter elements because the majority of the fights happen in extremely close range. There's only a few characters that can take you on at mid-range, and even then, that's either only with abilities or with some heavy item investment. At long range, not happening at all. While Deadlock uses its inspiration of shooters and MOBAs extremely well, especially when combining them into one kind of game, at the same time it falls flat because it doesn't innovate enough on either idea. It is pretty much just a MOBA that controls like a shooter, and I don't know if that's enough. I mean, certain characters and items allow you to reach high grounds that most typically would never be able to reach at all, but they've got these like lightning, zappy rods on top of them that do massive damage to you for the longer you stay up there, just discouraging anyone from using their movement options correctly to try and take advantage of the uniqueness of their kit. I know that that sounds minor, but that really weakens the shooter element of it to me. It's as if there's a tug of war between the MOBA and shooter sides of Deadlock. When something leans too far in one direction, like using your character's kit to play on the high ground most couldn't reach being something expected from a shooter, it yanks the rope to make sure it doesn't outweigh the MOBA aspects by implementing something to discourage it. And this happens in reverse as well. Last hitting minions is common practice in a MOBA, but since that's something you wouldn't expect in a shooter, minions hang around for a second after dying to let you secure them, not punishing people who don't manage their ammo correctly. It's stuck in this awkward middle ground of not trying to succeed at either. As it stands, I don't know if I'll be playing Deadlock in the future as much as I have played either of its inspirations, but what I can say is that I really, really hope that I am wrong. Despite all my critiques, and quite frankly the shit that I've been talking, I have been enjoying the game, I have been having fun with it, especially with my friends. But there's something missing. Something that adds that spark, something that makes me want to come back and play the game again and again, because without that, I don't know if the game is going to last up to all the hype it's currently receiving. But I can only hope that I am just completely wrong and that we get something wholly unique added to Deadlock in the future. But either way, go find some method of getting into the alpha. It is a great time, and if some of the pain points that I mentioned get addressed, I can honestly see Deadlock joining my long-term game rotation. So if we learned anything today, it's that crossbreeding shouldn't always be encouraged, lads. Ah, for feck's sake. I don't really have much to say here, so I've got links in the description to my Twitch, Twitter, and Discord, so check them out if you'd like. And for now, just enjoy some bloopers of me failing to use my hands. So I've hit my quota of praises for this video, which means... Fuck. So I've hit my quota of praises, which means... Fuck. So you know which section this is gonna be. We're gonna do two sections here. So we're gonna do the one where he's holding the gun. How do I hold this again? That? Like this? So I've hit my quota of praises, which means... Shit.